Quake is truly a landmark title in gaming. It came out a day before Super Mario 64, and yet it was arguably just as innovative. With its mind-blowing 3D graphics, competitive online multiplayer, it was a big factor in the rise of 3D acceleration, speedrunning, machinima, gaming clans, virtual reality. It was one of the first FPS games with a Capture the Flag mod. Navy SEALs and Action Quake 2 were the predecessors to Counter-Strike. Team Fortress essentially pioneered the class-based shooter. The tech was so efficient that it was iterated upon and reused for years. Return to Castle Wolfenstein, Call of Duty, Titanfall, Apex Legends, Half-Life. All these games run on some descendant of the Quake engine, and no matter how far removed they get, if you look close enough you can still see some remnants of that revolutionary tech still buried underneath the surface. Even Half-Life Alyx has the same light flicker patterns decades later. This game was so innovative, maybe too much for its own good, because unlike Mario 64, it has a lot of competition in the genre it helped to create nowadays, to the point where it's almost buried under its own legacy. I mean, yeah, anyone who is even a slight bit of a gaming enthusiast probably knows of this game's importance, but the actual game itself is less talked about or played nowadays. So instead of talking about why this game is important like everyone else already has, I just want to talk about why I think it's good, and why I personally love this game. I mean, I wasn't even around when any of this stuff was happening. My Zoomer ass did not start playing Quake because it was doing anything new or interesting. I started playing Quake because of a different game. When I was a kid, Team Fortress 2 captured my imagination with its colorful characters and bombastic, crude sense of humor that was really unlike anything I had ever seen at the time. But there was one problem. It didn't run well on my PC at all. So naturally, I tried looking for Team Fortress 1, assuming that an older game would run a lot better. And I learned it was a mod for this old game called Quake. A game so old, I was able to play it in mere seconds of learning its name, due to the fact I found a flash port of the game on a sketchy website. I remember feeling shocked that there was an FPS game so lightweight it could run in a web browser. And then I started playing it, and I was almost instantly drawn in by the tight controls and fluid gameplay. Every element of Quake is so simple. There's no reloading, secondary fire, weapon upgrades, ordinances, minigames, vehicles, interactable objects. The movement controls literally boil down to 4 directions, a run key and a jump key. There's no weapon spread for most of the arsenal. It doesn't even have a lot of stuff that Doom did, like a use key. Doors in these dimensions of ancient horrors open automatically, like you're walking into a department store. You slam your body into buttons to press them, and if that doesn't work, you fucking shoot them. And they bleed, because the game's interactivity is so bare bones that shootable objects have the same health values as the enemies. And maybe this all sounds like a detriment, but it's why I personally love this game. It's so easy to just pick up and play, which was great for me because it was literally the second shooter I'd ever played. TF2 drew me in with its colorful aesthetic and ridiculous action, but if you ask me what was actually happening, my little 12-year-old brain that just wasn't used to FPS games yet couldn't tell you. Quake drew me in because it was instantly understandable and engaging. Instead of trying so hard to create an entirely new experience, id Software looked inwards at their previous projects and streamlined their design with a level of polish and expertise only really capable at the time by those who invented the genre. It's FPS gaming at its most distilled and bare bones, but it doesn't matter because what it does have makes up for that in ridiculously high and dynamic skill ceilings, and the end result is a remarkably minimalist and elegant game. The easiest example is the rocket launcher, a weapon so good that it's remained practically unchanged throughout most of the Quake series, and has even made its way over to entirely different games. It's a simple weapon, it just fires out a projectile and explodes. It does 100 or so damage on direct impact and incrementally less based on how close your enemy is to the blast. But the travel time of the weapon, combined with other variable elements of the game like the speed and distance of your opponent, makes it always engaging to use. It's got the same amount of depth as learning how to use an AK in Counter-Strike, but there's no reloading or spread patterns or any of that. It's just point and shoot, and that's what makes its depth so incredible. And this is the same for many weapons in the arsenal. The lightning gun is this defensive powerhouse that can take out any enemy on the map in moments, but the low ammo means you have to be really picky about who you use it on. It's basically just drawing a straight line out from where you're shooting, but there's still a fair amount of strategy and skill involved in using it properly. The grenade bounces around, but it's consistent with very minimal physics beyond a simple arc, so you can get really good at firing it around corners and up past blind spots. Plus it has a beautifully satisfying noise. So many things in Quake are like this, like movement. The movement controls in this game literally take up 6 keys. It's just move around and jump. How complex could that be? Well, the answer is very complex. Quake is rather famous for its speedy, skill-based movement, but while a lot of other games have built-in mechanics like wall running, crouch sliding, and dashing, specific button combos you can do to take advantage of player movement, all of Quake's movement comes from its simple systems. Rocket jumping is just taking advantage of explosion knockback. Bunny hopping essentially stems from the fact the game likes to give you a speed boost when you turn, and combining that quirk with repeatedly jumping to preserve momentum. Don't believe me? I did a whole video about it. These mechanics can take some learning, but once you get the hang of them, they feel so natural. And even then, it can take years to get really good at them past that point. Quake is a great example of a game that is easy to learn but hard to master. Something that you could say about a lot of the greatest games ever made. Its simplicity is a major part of what makes it so damn addictive for me. My hands just sink into the keyboard and my dopamine spikes whenever I hit a shot that's just a little bit better than the last time, or I make a cool jump I've never done before. Despite its simplicity, you're constantly discovering new tricks and feeling yourself get stronger, and adding on to that entrancing feeling is the atmosphere of this game. Despite being so dated, the art style of Quake is one of its biggest draws today. Visually, it holds up amazing compared to other games of its era. With just a few tweaks, it looks like a modern indie game. And fans have been begging for a full reboot in this world with modern graphics for years now. Look at this box art. It's one of my favorite pieces of graphic design ever. Created by Sasha Shore, it's such a minimalist yet effective design. You could place this on store shelves nowadays and it'd look like a modern game, and an interesting one at that. Quake is often cited with the creation of the bland, monotone-looking FPS game, and yeah, while the color palette of the game is a lot moodier than shooters that came before it, it has this grunge-era-inspired grit to it that I think separates it from the pack, accentuated by the presence of the phenomenal ambient industrial soundtrack by 9 Inch Nails. This is why a lot of people like Quake nowadays, the unique setting and aesthetic. And while I love seeing all these new players come in due to it, what I don't like surrounding the modern conversation around Quake is how people tend to dismiss pretty much everything else about the game. A lot of people almost treat Quake as this missed opportunity. The original concept for the game was much more ambitious, involving a focus on magic and melee, CRPG elements, and a much more fleshed out and varied world, or multiverse for that matter. But the fully 3D engine took much longer than anticipated to complete, and eventually most of the concept for Quake was scrapped in favor of another Doom-style title. Design was prioritized above all else, while the loose concept was hastily reapplied to the shooter game. But while the original concept for Quake is interesting, and this may be a controversial opinion, I don't think this game would be nearly as fun nowadays if it had all of what it promised. In a weird, paradoxical way, the more you try experimental and complex stuff in a game, the faster it can age. And I do also think that the more stripped down nature of this game from its original concept does contribute to the vibes people love so much about it. Once again, good level design was prioritized over setting or adhering to any sense of reality. It still maintains that dark atmosphere, but the fact nothing you see really makes any sense in any form of reality combines that grunginess with a sense of surrealism. Rarely do you ever find a room in Quake that serves any purpose but to house enemies and traps. You'll enter what looks like a castle, but it is not a castle, it is a lie. It's just one giant death trap that is not at all designed like how a castle should be designed. Why are these nail launchers in the entrance to the castle? It's not like they were just set there because they knew I was coming. They look like they're embedded into the wall and a part of the castle's actual architecture. And this castle looks ancient. Why does this walkway have giant ass holes on the side of them that could easily lead to someone falling and breaking their legs, with an elevator that leads to a locked door that can only be unlocked after going through many more hallways filled with many more death traps that clearly seem to be a part of the castle's design, and then that door just leads to a hole with a drop that would kill any average person. Obviously, I'm being rather pedantic. These aren't meant to be actual criticisms, I'm not CinemaSins, but my point is, all these design choices make it feel like this world hates you, like it was made to kill you. There's just danger around every corner. Quake's campaign is a non-stop barrage of interesting combat challenges and death traps that hit so good you never really think about how none of it makes any sense. But the oppressiveness of that design just seeps into your skull. It exudes a violent hostility that makes it feel almost as if the world itself wants you dead, in a way that no other game really manages. The walls are lined with the images of human skulls. There's images of Jesus Christ's crucifixion hung strung in these abstract representations of churches, provocative imagery to humans alone in a distinctly inhuman world. The creatures of this dimension have never encountered humans before, yet it's almost as if they evolved to be human-killing machines. And that's reflected in the enemy design. Doom was able to have kind of slow and methodical enemies with simple, readable patterns, despite the player's high agility and damage output. Because they were just a handful of pixels, you could place hundreds of them in a level in strategically placed groups, where their combined efforts make for a challenging experience. Quake did not have the luxury of 2D sprites, instead having to render fully 3D polygonal enemies in a time where games just didn't do that, and there simply couldn't be as much present in a single level. So to compensate, enemies are much more aggressive and snappy. Let's see how long it takes one grunt to kill us in each game. They still have clearly readable patterns and functions, and they can be arranged in many interesting patterns similar to Doom, but they have this much more intense and violent energy that gives them a unique edge that I don't think was ever replicated in an id Software game until Doom Eternal 23 years later. They don't walk around slowly and stop and pop, they charge and slash, they force you to move and dodge. The funny thing is, this campaign is inarguably easier than Doom or Doom 2, even on the Nightmare difficulty, but everything about the way it's presented through its sights and sounds feels just so much more savage that it makes your blood pump and unlocks this primal combat mode in your mind. Like a more upbeat Nine Inch Nails song, there's an undeniable darkness to it, but there's also just this intense drive that hypes you the hell up, and it all combines to give you one of the most brutal yet enveloping feeling shooters in gaming. And then there's the custom maps for this game, and holy shit. I don't think it's a stretch to say the community has fully realized the dark fantasy aesthetic of Quake more than the original game did at this point. I love the surrealness of the original game, as I said, but good god, with these fully fleshed out environments, this game goes from gritty and oppressive to awe-inspiringly beautiful. It truly fulfills Quake's original concept of hopping between different dimensions. Every map feels like a place, and the modern modding tools for Quake make it shockingly easy to express yourself through your maps. It makes this game feel infinite. There's always new interesting dimensions and worlds to explore and master. But nowhere does that feeling of mastery and infinite combat reveal itself more than the multiplayer for this game. There is a reason this game is cited with being so important to esports. Everything I said about Quake being dynamic gets amped up to 100 when you're going head-to-head with other players with the same tools at their disposal. The movement really comes into its own in these more free-form arenas. Unshackled from the linear routes of the single-player maps, you will constantly find new ways to route yourself around any given map. Bunny hopping and rocket jumping make this mode so much fun strategically, as you can always get anywhere you want in mere moments. But in doing so, you make a bunch of noise, so sometimes it's better to stay grounded and sneak around. The combat is always just this flurry of rockets and lightning bolts slicing through the air that's chaotic but surprisingly readable and once again very elegant, with players being bounced around while trying to juke each other until finally it ends in an explosion of gore, or a player being slammed against a wall with a suitably oomphy grunt of pain from Trent Reznor. The best arenas for this game can put you in thousands of unique combat situations over hundreds of games, and it truly is one of the most rewarding experiences to come out of those unique situations on top. It is an intense yet pure competitive shooter experience. You can't blame characters or loadouts because everyone starts off on the same foot and has to make their own advantages. In something like Super Smash Bros., me and my friends will always find a way to spin the character the other took into why the other player is Hitler and a rapist actually. It's obviously all in good fun, but you can't really do that in Quake when everyone gets the same opportunities. Yet there's still enough variability in the mechanics to make it feel like you're always learning new ways to outsmart your opponents. When I win in a lot of games, I feel like I kinda just got lucky a lot of the time. When I win in Quake, I really feel like I fucking won. Because it really is a game where there's next to no random factors determining how you do. I feel like I made those decisions and played by the rules and came out on top. I won a completely fair fight. Except for the spawns. The spawns can be kinda bull.
So he's getting this kill, and then the first spawn frag, second spawn frag, third spawn frag, fourth, fifth, and look at the spam, look at the spam, look at the spam. He's gonna get his, what is this, 7th? And this is his 8th. And this is his, well, almost 9th. But then this happens. So Reppy dies. And then he dies again. And he spawns down here. And then he spawns here. And then he spawns down here again. And then he spawns here. And then down there again.
And despite the fact it's what it's most famous for, deathmatch isn't the only way to play multiplayer Quake. Quake has a lot of gameplay mods, and it shows just how versatile this game is, and how good of a template it was to build off of. I feel like this side of Quake really shows the excitement and creativity coming out of this era of gaming at the time. It feels like people designing virtual sports. A lot of early Quake mods were just about making interesting rules. Clan Arena for a simple, more combat-focused experience. Capture the Flag does Capture the Flag better than most modern day shooters because it understands how, alongside teamwork, speed is important to making that game mode interesting. There's Team Fortress, which was a much more strategic game at the time. You have Headhunters, where you gather all of your enemies' heads and have to dunk them into an altar for points. And then there's Pain Keep, which lets you eat beans and fart to kill enemies. If you can't tell by this point, this game is a rabbit hole, and I'm not going to go any deeper for now. I do plan on making more in-depth videos on the various different factions and mechanics of the game in the future, so be sure to subscribe, like, and share this video around if you want to see more content like this. But this video was just meant to be a love letter to one of my favorite games ever made. It can range from baby's first FPS game to insanely coordinated competitive beauty to Hellfire Fuckfest, and I love it. I find myself reaching for this game all the time, whether I just want to chill out and mindlessly grind away at B-hop maps while listening to YouTube videos and podcasts, immerse myself in charming, low-poly 3D worlds, or test my focus, wit, and skill in the arena. Recently, I've been even getting into making my own mods, and while making this video, I got my name on the speedrunner leaderboards for the first time, before promptly being dethroned the next day by someone who discovered a sick-as-hell trick on the same map. But it just goes to show how this game is still giving me new experiences a decade later. If you are at all interested in FPS gaming whatsoever, there is something for you here, and you should play this game. Now is a better time than ever to give it a try, with the recent remaster making it super easy to play. This game used to take a lot of configuring with mods and source ports and tracking down the soundtrack to get a good experience with it, and while the recent remaster isn't perfect, specifically with mod support, it is pretty damn close and a super easy way to get a good experience with this game right out of the box. Quake has provided me with thousands of hours of entertainment. At $10, it is an absolute steal for a classic that still holds up to this day. And on top of that, you could probably run it on a computer that costs half of that. Hell, you can try this game for free in your web browser right now, much like I did back in the day, with a WebGL version of the game that runs much better than that old Flash port I played. It does have a lot of caveats compared to the remaster. There's no animation interpolation or any of the fancy graphical upgrades I enabled to make this video look sexy. There's a link in the description where you can play it right now if this video has convinced you to try this game at all. Who knows? Maybe you'll end up loving this game just as much as I do. See you next time.